All right. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the legal retainer. And I've made it no secret, I am not a fan of the traditional billing model that we use as attorneys, high retainers, big refill rates. And so I'm hoping to use this lesson to illustrate the flaw in that system. So let's take us back to the origins of the legal profession. We're talking about the medieval times between the 12th and 16th century in England. It's really important to frame this whole conversation with the understanding that our profession started in England, right? So originally, retainers were used by nobles, wealthy landowners, to secure the loyalty of their attorney. Most attorney actions services were related to land ownership back then, and so wealthy individuals would hire an attorney to defend their assets or to pursue other assets, and there were no conflict rules. So the attorney could take the information they get from their potential client or their client and go to the other side and say, hey, for X amount of money, I'll tell you what they're trying to do and I'll help you succeed. So initially, this was just a loyalty payment, and it was meant to make sure that you're not working for the other side. Quick sidebar. This happened in England. Let me remind you, England has a king, and so they're not self-governed. Laws are not designed to help people self-govern in England. Laws were meant to enforce the king's word. So please keep in mind, our entire profession had an original purpose of simply enforcing the government or Big Brother or the king's word, not helping regular people. And you're going to see that as a theme throughout. All right, so then we move forward to the 17th through the 19th century. This is the advent of legal ethics. So we started to move towards an ethical retainer. And these were essentially like a prepayment for services. So again, it was typically reserved for wealthy individuals, nobles and landowners. And they would put down a deposit to basically prepay for a lawyer's services. So it wasn't just for their loyalty. The loyalty is now imputed by the ethics. This was just a prepayment for services. Who can do that? Primarily wealthy people. Now we move into the 20th century and we see the rise of the retainer agreements as we know them now. Essentially a prepayment or a deposit for the attorney. They bill against that, and then when they need more, they ask you to refill the retainer, thousands of dollars each time, or they send you an invoice at the end of the month, typically for thousands of dollars. Again, this billing method relies on large lump sum payments, right? That has never changed. They rely on large lump sum payments that typically aren't accessible by regular folks. But we see it moving towards somewhat more of a client-centered focus, somewhat more of a service to society. In the US, the big contrast and difference is that our entire way of life is dependent on the laws of our society. We don't just have a king or the government barking down the way we can live our lives. We elect people that then determine those things based on what we want to have happen. At least that's how it's supposed to work. And then laws are meant to govern our society, self-governance. And then of course, attorneys serve an incredibly important function in our society compared to England's, where we are supposed to support and advocate for individual rights, personal freedoms, right? Personal rights. And so our function becomes much more important. It's not reserved just for the wealthy. And that can be seen in the preamble to the model rules. I'm obsessed with the preamble to the model rules. I mention them all the time. But in paragraph 6 in particular, there's a line that says attorneys need to be mindful of the fact that the poor and sometimes those that are not poor can't afford financial services. So we start to see somewhat of a shift towards client-centered modeling in the 20th century. And then that transitions into the 21st century, where we start to see a lot more alternative billing methods, right? So we have the advent of limited scope, flat fees, things that attorneys are utilizing to make our services more accessible to clients. What's really interesting about the shift to retainers in the 20th century is that they weren't for regular people. These were typically fees collected up front for corporate interests, right? So it's the advent of complex litigation, class action lawsuits, things along those lines, EPA, government agency suits, companies being sued, Exxon, things like that for environmental disasters. Large law firms would secure enormous retainers to make sure of payment, especially for matters that are that complex. So never was it meant for regular people. It was meant for large firms that could afford to pay in large amounts. So the intent is not always in line with the reality, because even though we're coming up with these alternative ways to be able to bill our clients, attorneys are still using traditional methods of collecting the money and traditional payment plans. So yeah, great. Instead of a $5,000 retainer that's now open-ended and the client can't, plan or budget on what that cost is going to be, cool. An attorney gives them a $6,000 flat fee. Now the client knows this is what I'm looking at, this is what I have to budget for. But then attorneys will just sabotage themselves. And they'll say, oh, well, the payment terms on that flat fee is $3,000 now and then $3,000 in 30 days. And, I have talked about the fact multiple times, income demographics do not support that type of payment plan. If you look at income demographics, obviously the 20%, the high income earners, they have really high income, they have $40,000 to $40,000 in the bank at any given time. Doesn't matter how you structure their services, they're going to be able to hire you. They are 20% of the population. Currently, as a profession, we're only servicing 23% of the population. So why aren't these other people able to acquire services? Because of their income restrictions. Not even their income. Their income's great. It's their cash reserve restrictions. So their income is anywhere between $4,000 and $15,000 a month. They drive nice cars, their kids go to a nice school district, they belong to the country club, but their restriction is an average of $1,000 to $4,000 in cash on hand. Keep that in mind. $1,000 to $4,000 cash on hand. That's half the population. Half the population. $1,000 to $4,000 cash on hand, $4,000 to $15,000 a month, right? So take my last example, a $6,000 flat fee. Yes, the client can likely come up with the initial $3,000, but when you put the prohibitive terms in there that 30 days later they have to come up with another $3,000, that's the part where they fail and they're not able to acquire representation. And again, in our society, that tends to break the machine. We need clients to be able to access our services so that we can get them the relief they need and things can continue to march on in an orderly fashion. Look at what's happening with the lack of representation now. Overloaded courtrooms, custody battles that should be very cookie cutter are now blowing up into, enormous conflicts, and there's children and family at the centers of these things. So this failure on our part to solve for this has spanned 8 centuries, and we still have yet to come up with a system that helps regular people on a regular basis. So I wanted to walk you through the history of this just to show you very little has changed. We're not doing enough to help regular people, and we're not doing enough to evolve our profession. And I'm certain that we can do better. Just as a quick summary, in medieval times, attorneys were paid just for their loyalty, so they didn't go represent the other side. 17th through 19th century, it was like a pay in advance for services. You were pretty much just paying the entire amount in advance for any work that an attorney was going to do. In the 20th century, we move into more the modern retainer model, but keep in mind that was for complex litigation, corporations, typically an entity that could already pay the large fee in advance. And then we move into the 21st century, and yeah, we have a bunch of different alternatives, subscription models, flat fees, things like that, but we're still structuring those payments in ways that are preclusive to your average everyday person. So what shifts or changes do you think we need to make as a profession to actually bridge the gap into effectively helping your average everyday person? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, please like and subscribe. It really helps to get the word out. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next video.